So our next speaker tonight is Maria Cadenas. She's the executive director of Santa Cruz Community Ventures, which is committed to developing compassionate and equitable local economies that contribute to the region's well-being. One of the biggest factors that contribute to the cyclical nature of systemic racism is that continuously widening wealth gap that disproportionately impacts people of color. And as Maria will explain, this isn't by accident. Policies that were founded on racist beliefs are a major reason for this. And I'll let Maria tell you more.
Thanks, Tulsi. And thank you to Lookout and everybody else who's spoken before me. I think this topic is timely, but it's also a reminder of how human it is and personal. So when I was approached to speak, you know, I have my grass ready to share with our audience, but it really comes down to the recognition of our humanity of each other. And like we like to say in ventures, we say it needs to be founded on justice and love. If we cannot start our systems from that angle, then we are creating systems that are unjust and are not recognition of the humanity of each of us. And so when we think about the economy, a lot of people want to think about money, you know, but I'm reminded of how I ended up at Ventures. I actually came to Santa Cruz over 10 years ago now, and my first search was actually to look for hate groups online to see where I could move to. Because and to think that I'm not the only person of color that does that. To learn about Santa Cruz through a hate lens as a sunset town, to learn about the hotspots of KKK that are right here in our community, in our mountains, and to have to navigate housing, not only because of cost, but out of fear of my safety. As some of you know, I ran for office, but how many would have considered that I had to consider my safety in putting my name on the ballot and not being comfortable in having to spend time seeking out a safe, neutral location for my campaign offices out of my own concern. And I share that because when we talk about race, which is a construct made up out of a sense of power and control, we forget how much it trickles into everyday activities, including our economic activities. Because the reality is that the economy and capitalism, if you would, and the governance and policies behind it used it to create barriers and to keep people out from not allowing Mexican Americans to have bank accounts, Black Americans to get loans, right? And all of that happened within few generations of today. This is not a far gone, never happened close to us. This is just a few generations. There were initiatives to build Black banks and credit unions a while back, but they were never funded, they were never supported, they were never leveraged, and they all died. These are conscious steps that are systemic and structural in nature, from redlining to others that keep people out. And I want to remember that we're here today in part in recognition of the importance of the movement around Black Lives Matter, and is centered on the fact that this country sits on racist roots. And until we can address it and own it, then we are never going to move forward. When we look at ventures, we define very specifically that we want to create communities that are compassionate and equitable and contribute to our well-being. And when we talk about well-being, we like to say that it is the presence of the highest possible quality of life in its full breadth. It's good living standards, robust health, sustainable environment, educated people, balance, democratic participation. That is what we call well-being. And until we can aim for that and recognize it, we won't get there. The other piece is that well-being is intrinsically tied to the distribution of income and wealth. Because the greater the distribution, the more equitable distribution, the better the community does across the board. And right now we don't have that. We have great accumulation of wealth that is higher than it's ever been. And it relies on an ecosystem of policies and laws to perpetuate itself. One of the things that I have, that one of the graphs or notices that we have is that, white people have 3 times the wealth of people of color who have the same income. This is not about just, even if we owned the same home, had the same job, had the same income, same level of education, a white peer would still have 3 times the wealth. And if nothing changes, we will never address that gap. That's how significant it is. And what does that do for communities? It leaves people out. I think for ventures and for me, we say it all starts with love and justice, but it also starts with the recognition that our current social, political, and economic systems are inherently capitalist, patriarchal, and racist. So we cannot look about access or inclusion. We need to change the systems because the systems are creating the very disparities that they were meant to create. They're creating exactly the outcomes that they were designed to do. So if we do not actively address systems, then we're never going to get to a solution. When we talk about race, a lot of times there's discussions about the racial equity theories and how you get to that. Well, if you go race neutral, is that you don't talk about race. It omits race. It somehow all boats will rise. Well, that doesn't work. We know it doesn't work, right? And then you have race consciousness, arguing that race and ethnicity, are a variable in public policy and program design. But it's just, you're just being conscious about it. But if we're looking at diversity, inclusion, we're going to diversify the voices on that. But the real goal is structural racism. It's address structural racism beyond individual, beyond institutional, to a broader system that has long held historical policies and practices that still stand. When we create policies at the local level, when we say that that we're going to look at health, racism as a health issue, which is important, well, what does that mean in policy exactly? When we look at about talking about police and safety, one of the conversations I had is like, great, change the police department and move it to the health sector for the mental health providers. But that health sector is just as racist. Look at their outcomes. Look at the health outcomes. That system is just as racist as the police system. And it's not about an individual police officer, and it's not about an individual nurse. It's about the systemic structures that are in place, and we have to have difficult conversations because it's not easy. It's not easy, and it is exhausting, and it is heartbreaking, and it's constant trauma and constant reminders. For microaggressions, I know most people assume that I live in Watsonville because I'm Latina. Meet Latinos in Santa Cruz, and most people assume that they are commuting from Watsonville because they're Latinos. There's assumptions that because you're a person of color, you must be low income, right? Or somehow I came from farm worker parents. There are stories and assumptions that we make that we have to keep talking against this frame that is given to us. And that's exhausting. And it's tiring. And we have to do it every day. Because while the news media may move on, our lives don't. And that's what we fight. And that's what we are here to debate and worry. Before I close, though, I want to say right now, the changes that are happening at a policy level are crucial. Look at the budgets that are being proposed by the governor. Those programs are around $500 for every child in first grade that is low income. Those policies around guaranteed income models, those policies about expanding Medi-Cal, policies around providing better care for child care providers and caregivers. They're critical policies that shift the current economic structures. So if we care about that, we have to call and advocate for them to take place, and then advocate to see who is actually going to implement it, and then be there for the elected officials that took the risk to step up and say it, because those are very difficult conversations to do. I want to share with you as a closing, I haven't shared this in over 20 years, but the issue of race and identity and the burden it carries is throughout your life. I wrote this poem when I was 19 years old in a liberal arts college in Wisconsin. And I read it to you because I think it's a reminder of the anger and hurt that we carry. It's called Ratas Blancas. As if you didn't know, baby, that when you call my name, you call yourself an open-minded liberal, a hero of this 20th century. No, I'm just a label to you, a badge to slap across your breast, a proclamation of your American worldliness. And you believe, honestly believe, that if it was your fingers that held the chisel that carved the Statue of Liberty and planted those words of inspiration at its feet, because you say, I believe and live by it. But wasn't it you who refused to vote against eliminating bilingual education in California? And wasn't it you who did research to try to prove that wetbacks were the reason for your welfare problems? As if immigrants picking your strawberries and your grapes were nothing more than pests to eliminate. Yes, it was you. And it was you who informed me over lunch that immigration officers rape Mexican women just because they tried to cross the border without a visa. And you watched countless beatings and killings and racist burnings before eating dinner, as if nothing worthwhile was on television. And I want to tell you, my liberal and justice-fed friend, that you are a liar. A white rat crawling in the city, sitting yourself down with black women and brown men and black men and brown women so as to say, yeah, you did it, and anything else that sounds politically correct. Well, all the while, baby, all the while, you don't give a damn that one good single goddamn. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. That was incredibly powerful, and thank you for being here. We really appreciate it.